Hi everybody, Joe Cioffi here on this Tuesday, April the 10th, 2018, 6:01 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time as we get the next live stream underway. And let me just say right off the bat, the Joe and Joe show tonight on Facebook is at its usual time, 9:15 Eastern Time, so just jump on my Facebook page, meteorologist Joe Cioffi, or on Joe Rayo's Facebook page, Joe Rayo Weather, and we will update you on everything that is going on. Seeing everybody jumping on board this evening, including meteorologist and fishing buddy Phil Bazanka. Good to see you here, Phil. And now get back to work. Kevin Francis, James Vitale. Oh, you're getting the green screen with lights and everything. Awesome. Good for you. Let me know when you're up and running, and we'll give you a plug. Delvin is here. I haven't seen you in a while, buddy. Good to see you. David Fuller, James NASCAR, Timothy Veltman, who was the first one on today, and Kevin Francis. So good to see everybody here. And going forward, the weather is going to be a bit on the turbulent side in the middle part of the country, which means that areas on both coasts may benefit from this, at least initially. We here are waiting for that elusive warm-up that has evaded us since February, when we saw temperatures hit highs up around 80 degrees. I'm just going to flip the light on, maybe get a little bit of better lighting in here. Yeah, there we go. Makes it a little brighter. Remember back in mid-February when everybody thought winter was over, when temperatures here in my area hit the 70s to near 80, and in a few places setting all-time record highs. Well, we haven't been anywhere close to that since, and we are going to see temperatures in the 70s to near 80 here on Saturday. Friday we will see temperatures in some places climb up well into the 70s, but there are some issues that we're going to have to deal with this coming weekend. We are going to have a backdoor cold front, so how that front times out coming down from New England, and how when does it move through the area from southern New England to southern New Jersey? Does it come through on Saturday? Some places may see it come through earlier in the day. Some places may see it come through late in the day or Saturday night. So that is going to impact temperatures. In the meantime, we have the beginnings of the next storm system that's really going to be orchestrating all this, and we'll bring up the watches and warnings map here. So the first winter storm watches are now posted up for the Northern Rockies, much of southern and southeastern Montana, and on up through the northern half of Wyoming, into northern Nebraska, the more than the western half of South Dakota, and southern areas of North Dakota. In the bright purplish area, I guess we can call that purple, from eastern Colorado, western Kansas, parts of Nebraska into North Texas, on westward across all of New Mexico and Arizona, and into parts of Southern California. This area is extremely dry, if not in a long-term drought. And as a result, we've got fire danger here to worry about, with a strong storm forming to the north. That's going to create a large area of strong winds, and we have various wind advisories and high wind watches up for parts of the southwest and on through parts of Utah, Nevada, back over into western Nevada and extreme east and northeastern California. Some freeze watches and I'm sorry, let me start that again. Freeze warnings and frost warnings up, and freeze watches up for Kentucky and Tennessee. I'm sorry, I'm having a tough time getting this straight. The rest of the country, pretty quiet. We have a little stray area of winter weather advisories up for some of the mountains in northern Oregon. So let's look at what's happening this evening here. First off, in the Northeast, we had a weak weather system go through today. I actually had some ice pellets at my house overnight, and this morning we've got some rain and snow showers in upstate New York and in parts of New England. No big deal here, but still it is something. and this is going to probably start to taper off during the overnight hours and into tomorrow morning. When we look at the national radar, about the only spot that's getting some hefty thunderstorm activity today is in Central and South Florida, as we see some strong thunderstorms and some heavy showers, although we don't see, this is not being indicated as an area of severe weather risk. In fact, there is nothing with regards to severe weather risk here in the short term. We'll bring up the Storm Prediction Center's map, or do I have double radars here? Nope, this is it. This is a Storm Prediction Center's map at the moment, and we do have a small area of marginal risk in and around the Miami-Fort Lauderdale area. You can see some showers and storms that are running southward through Central Florida and heading further south toward Naples, Sarasota, Port Charlotte, and on south from there. Out in the west, a small area of thunderstorms being indicated possible in the mountains of Idaho and northwestern Oregon. So that kind of takes care of the thunderstorm activity today. Now, we are going to see severe weather eventually develop out of this system that's going to be coming out of the west. So we're going to start focusing our attention here on this, since this is really going to be the main driver going forward weather-wise across the U.S. as we move through the latter part of this week and then through this weekend into early next week. There we go. And I just want to say thank you to Kevin Francis for hitting Super Chat tonight. Really appreciate it. It's going to get me a cup of coffee, which I'm going to need to keep my energy going. So we're going to take a look at the GFS model tonight. We're seeing the weather pattern across the United States taking on something a bit more typical for spring in terms of how the jet stream behaves. You start to see the deeper troughs kind of retreat more toward the middle part of the country, and you get the flare-ups of ridges on either side. And if you look at that jet stream pattern here as we go forward, here comes that deep trough. This is for Saturday. You can see how wrapped up this upper air system is, so it's fairly intense. And as a result, we get ridges of high pressure to pop up on both coasts, which makes the weather relatively tranquil. I would point out, if you look up into southeastern Canada, you can see a strong west to east flow that runs across James Bay and into eastern Canada up toward New Brunswick and Labrador. This is where the cold Canadian air is coming down, and as a result, we do have a surface high that is spreading out across southern Canada, which is going to be the catalyst for the backdoor cold front that will eventually run its way down into the eastern part of the United States. So as far as the way this weather system is going to play out, first off, we have a system offshore, very weak. This is what we dealt with today. It was a very damp, dreary day until the mid-afternoon, and then weather conditions began to improve in my area. Much of the country quiet, a little bit of snow up in northern Minnesota and in and around the lakes and in northern New England. And in the west, we're seeing moisture coming in as energy starts to roll in to the Pacific Northwest. Now, one lead system is going to run eastward on Wednesday into Thursday, and that really is going to start bringing up that warmer air. You see that high that's off along the North Carolina coast. That starts to bring up warmer air up through the lower and middle Mississippi Valley and on up into the Ohio Valley. This is really not going to do very much, but you can also begin to see the catalyst for the storm in the west with that 92 low in northeastern Utah and snow back into northern Nevada, eastern Oregon, up into eastern Washington through Idaho. You start to get some rain in the mix too because of the time of year, so there will be, some of that snow is going to be elevation driven, and we have a little stripe of heavy snow that runs down the mountains in the eastern part of California. So now that low translates into western Nebraska. Heavy snow breaks out across parts of Montana. You can see in the dark blue that the model generates, and then that low just kind of takes its time moving eastward. That upper air feature in the middle of the country is going to take a while to move across, so there'll be a fairly long period of snow out of this across the plains, and this pretty much covers where the winter storm watches are up through Wyoming, Montana, into western South Dakota, northwestern Nebraska, southern North Dakota, and a little stripe across Minnesota into the northern lakes. This is Friday afternoon. To the north of this is the beginning of that big high that's spreading out across the top. And as we move into Saturday, with that deep wrapped up low in western Iowa, heavy snow probably on the back side of this. If you look in the east, the boundary where you see the rain and then the snow up in northern Maine, there is a weather front here that runs from that low straight eastward, a warm front that runs across the Great Lakes, and then it turns into a cold front from western New York on up into New England. So as long as that front is lying that far north, areas to the south are going to be able to warm up considerably. Strong southwest flow, high pressure offshore. The isobars are actually implying more of a west-southwest wind, which keeps the sea breeze a bit at bay, at least for a while. But as we go through Saturday and into Saturday night, the high starts to press down, and that backdoor front starts to make its way southward. Here's where the problem lies in the forecast, as far as my area is concerned. The GFS continues to insist that that backdoor front is going to be up into central New England. Looks like just south of I-90 by Saturday evening. Actually, probably starts to tail a little further south, touching eastern Long Island and into southeastern New England. So north of there, you start to get into this onshore flow. When we look at the Canadian model earlier today, and the European as well, it has a stronger high pushing south and forcing that backdoor further south faster. Okay, so that probably means, if that's correct, that areas in southern New England and up into from southern Massachusetts into southern New England and Long Island could actually see their temperatures fall during the afternoon on Saturday, probably reaching the upper 60s and low 70s, and then very quickly dropping into the 50s, and in some cases along the coast probably even into the 40s, while from, say, New York City south and west, or maybe southern areas of the Hudson Valley and all of Pennsylvania south and west, temperatures are going to be up in the 70s to around 80. So if we look at the temperature profile, they'll go back to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You can see it's 70s at least up through all of Connecticut, and then you start to get into the very tight between the 70s and the 40s. So this is where the GFS sees the front. I'll bring it up a little bit closer. So this would actually imply that most of my area is going to enjoy a really warm Friday and a really warm Saturday. I'll back it up to Friday, and you can see Friday's hot temperatures up into the upper 60s and mid 70s, and then we get into that really warm day on Saturday. I would say 70s to around 80. I definitely think, a lot of times this is not the high of the day. There's still probably another hour or two for temperatures to rise if there's a fair amount of sunshine, so we'll probably tack on a few more degrees to these numbers before the highs are reached. And then, of course, there's the issue of the back door. This is the Canadian model's view, by the way. The GFS has an even warmer profile further north. I mean, it gets 70s up into southern New Hampshire, southern Vermont, and on up to almost to Albany. This is at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And then by 8 o'clock, you start to see those temperatures back into the 50s, but still holding in the 60s and low 70s, where the back door hasn't passed yet. So this, to me, implies that the backdoor front is just about getting ready to move across eastern Long Island, and it looks like it's through eastern Connecticut by evening. The Canadian and the European are more aggressive with that front, pushing it a little bit further to the south, a bit faster, so that by the time you get to Sunday morning, you're looking at 40s across Long Island and 50s just about everywhere else on the GFS. And on the Canadian model, we're looking at temperatures. Look at the 40s on the Canadian down into central New Jersey. So again, a much more aggressive push of colder air. You can see the 30s and 20s because of that big high up in Canada pushing down in northern New England, down toward the Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire border. So this is This is really the struggle in the springtime here in the East. I don't know where this notion of spring being a beautiful season, at least of my way, ever came from, because rare is the spring that we wind up with conditions where we get days and days of sunshine and warm temperatures on a regular basis. The ocean's just too cold, and the atmosphere is still not quite over its wintertime mode. It takes time for the atmosphere in the springtime to warm up. It takes a long time. So, I just don't know where the idea that spring is a beautiful season came from. I kind of think it's a god-awful season, to tell you the truth. Of all the seasons, I think spring is the one I dislike the most, because of the fact that, you're at the point, the winter is what the winter is. You're at the point where you've had enough, especially this winter, and you want it to just kind of end. And the spring just basically drags it on with raw conditions. We are going to see a severe weather outbreak probably Friday night across the lower Mississippi Valley. The GFS picks up on this very strongly. All the models do. The storm you can see wrapped up in northwestern Iowa there with the heavy snows. And as we move east, you're going to see another round of possibly some severe thunderstorms Saturday night, breaking out across the Gulf states, the central and the eastern Gulf states, as the low in Iowa continues to weaken, and then a new low center is going to form to carry that energy. And you can see it here as we go into Sunday morning, as that runs up toward northeast Ohio. Strong thunderstorms from the Carolinas down into the Florida Panhandle and off the Florida coast that will probably move across Florida on Sunday evening. New low developing in western Virginia. Strong southerly flow along the east coast at this point. So from the low clouds, we're going to get into some rain and some heavy downpours. The European, by the way, and we have to be a little suspect, of course, with the model and how it's behaved. But when we look at the European surface here, this, to me, if this is correct, would imply a really solid soaking rain for the northern mid-Atlantic states and for a good chunk of, or if not all of the Northeast in time, with a low like this. Tight low in eastern Virginia, very tight gradient that develops here, strong southeast inflow coming in from off the ocean. So I'm going to be watching models closely here to see if it evolves into this sort of look that the European has much more of a wrapped up upper low feature into the Ohio Valley that creates all this. And we don't have any blocking, so as a result, the high where it is this is not something that you would see snow this time of year. Maybe if this were the winter time, if you had a little bit more blocking, perhaps you probably would see some snow out of this for sure. But you're not going to see it in a setup this time of year, because we're just too late in the game. And here's the GFS, a little bit of a different structure in its upper air, which we'll look at a bit more carefully. In the cold air, there's a cold high again wrapping around the backside, so we get some snow back through Michigan and Indiana and parts of Ohio and into Kentucky as that low runs northeast. More energy coming into the west with low pressure into Utah, snow and rain into California and into parts of the west. That low lifts up into Canada, and this is as far out as this particular model run goes. And by the early part of next week, we've got, this is out at day 6, we've got another low up into northeastern Montana, but it's cold air that comes back in on the back side of this. And this is going to set up, by the way, another chilly week next week, I think. We're going to get a negative North Atlantic oscillation. Pressures rising across Greenland, northeastern Canada. You can see how these upper lows are displaced pretty far to the south, right along 40 to 50 degrees north. One out in the Atlantic near the Azores. We have the storm system that's in the east, and we've got energy that now is crashing into the west on a fairly regular basis as the Pacific North America index goes negative as we go into next week as well. So we're kind of in that mode that we were in March to some degree, although we don't have as strong a blocking signature as we had back in March. We'll back up one run so we can take you a little bit further, but we're going to have, I think, a blocky signature through all of next week. So that's going to keep things cool and on and occasionally damp in the eastern part of the United States. And you can see here you get these weather systems that kind of roll along. We're not seeing models digging any of these systems southeastward toward the mid-Atlantic coast. So it's a big difference from what we had back in March with those 4 consecutive nor'easters. This looks a bit more benign, but at the same time, it's not the most pleasant weather pattern to be in going into the third week. Actually, 1st to 8th, 8th to 15th, so this will be the 15th to the 22nd. So yes, the third week of April. I'll bring the surface map back up here, and we'll move it along. So, whoops, there we go. So you can see that energy then that comes into the west kind of weakens a bit as it moves eastward. A little bit of a front maybe on Wednesday, but still, once that goes by, there's really no opportunity for it to warm up very much. Weather systems are tracking pretty far to the south here on the old run at least. We may have to wait till late in the forecast period, but the overall pattern to me just does not look conducive for any prolonged warm weather in the east. It is conducive to warm, dry weather in the southwest. That is going to continue. And of course, we've got these bouts of severe weather that we're going to be dealing with this particular storm as we go into the next couple of days, but beginning on Friday and then moving on through the weekend. Over we go to Euroland, and we noticed yesterday that there really wasn't too much happening. A little bit of storminess down in southern areas around Spain and in the Mediterranean. A little low there up in northern Africa that goes into the Mediterranean Sea. But on the whole, the weather looks fairly, reasonable for this time of year. There's not a whole lot of snow being indicated here either. So it looks like things are warming up according to the way they should as far as the spring is concerned. Just looks like, typical stuff happening as we go into the next couple of weeks across Europe. One of the things I discovered, by the way, was I had forgotten this, but looking back at last May, we were in a blocking pattern for a good part of the month. In fact, right before Memorial Day, we had a fairly strong blocking signature across North America and out in the North Atlantic, and that is very typical of the springtime, by the way. I'm going to show you that. Let me just roll this back, but we could show the precip. This is 24-hour rolling precip here going through the weekend. And you can see where the severe weather breaks out with those heavy rains across the southern states. And then eventually, as we go into Sunday night into Monday, that heavy rain translates northward up the east coast. Looks like on the order of 1 to some places as much as 3 inches. Moisture out in the west and the Northern Rockies. The Northern Rockies have gotten so much snow this year. I'm looking around for some sort of seasonal totals here. Snow. Okay, we'll take a look at what this storm may produce in snow. I did notice that the temperatures are not all that cold. The very cold air is further north. It's going to be cold, but marginally cold. We're talking about temperatures probably in the upper 20s to low 30s while this snow falls through the plain states. And we'll start with the western U.S. In terms of what the snowfall is going to be over the next several days with this storm. And you can see here there are actually some hefty amounts being indicated by the GFS across parts of Montana, parts of South Dakota, northern South Dakota, and in that narrow stripe it really goes ape across central Minnesota. So we're going to have to see if that's going to wind up verifying. Lighter amounts as you head south into Nebraska and northern Kansas, and some sporadic heavy amounts in parts of Wyoming and into northwestern Colorado. Some snows back out in the as we go west northwest across the Northern Rockies and into the western part of the United States. And in the east, as we take a look at what it has to say for us in the east, This is the new GFS, by the way. It switched back to the new GFS when I switched around. But there you have that snow, a narrow stripe of heavy snow across the northern lakes and into Canada. Looks like just north of Toronto. You go north of Toronto. There's some very heavy snows there in parts of southeastern Canada, so they're still getting pounded. But this is a fairly impressive area of snow being generated from the plains across the lakes and into northern New England. Caribou, Maine, I think I was messaged today, needs 6 more inches of snow, and they'll be in the top 10, I believe. I can just verify that very quickly. If you guys just hang on and give me a second here. Somebody messaged me this today, and let me pull up his message. I know sometimes I should have this stuff pre-planned, but I don't always have the time to do that. Caribou needs exactly, this was from Henry Furtek, who messages me from time to time in northern Maine. Caribou needs exactly 6 more inches for the season to move into the top 10 for seasonal snowfall. Currently at number 10 is 142.1 inches. That's almost twice what I've had on Long Island with 75.4. That was in the winter of 2014-2015, and the Caribou's standing right now at 136.2. Very, very impressive indeed. But you've got time, and it certainly looks like the models want to at least give you the idea that that is going to happen to some respect. So you're going to have shots. You still have some time, and you're still going to have shots to put down at least that 6 inches and maybe a little bit more. So you might vault up maybe to the 8th or 7th position before this is all said and done. So let me just come back to the board to everybody. Just give me 1 second here to set this up. I hope the audio is good. I'm still trying to flex the audio settings a little bit, and that you're hearing me okay. Not too crazy loud and not too crazy soft either. If some of you could just let me know if that is the case, that would be terrific. Spring mud season. Get the farming ready. Snow showers may bring flowers in the Berkshires. Lots of laughs. John Trabacchino, good point. We are absolutely soaked between the snow and the occasional rounds of heavy rain that we have dealt with. One of the things that I've noticed, at least down my way, is that a number of the local lakes and ponds, which were running fairly low, didn't get much lower during the fall months. But late in the fall and going into the winter, with the kind of winter we had with the snow, the melting snow, and the occasional rounds of heavy rain, a lot of the water levels have come up to look a bit more reasonable than what they were. Timothy Veltman and the Hallmark Channel with the delusion of beautiful springs. It really is not, at least in the Northeast. It really isn't, and it's about the coastal Northeast. The inland Northeast, after a while, it gains momentum, but the coastal Northeast, with that ocean still sitting in the low 40s, it's just so hard to warm things up for more than a day or so. The difference between the temperatures along coastal areas with a south wind versus a southwest wind is huge, and the difference between a southwest wind and a west wind is huge. Inland areas don't have this problem, but along the immediate coast, that sea breeze can be haunting at times, where you're sitting there in the 40s. I've been many times sitting in the 40s and 50s and looking at temperature observations across New Jersey in the 70s and low 80s. That is not an unusual occurrence by any stretch of the imagination. So again, the dilemma for Saturday is going to be that backdoor front, and sometimes models don't move it south fast enough. They don't recognize the cold, shallow air mass that's involved here, and oftentimes those backdoors push further south a bit faster and wind up getting further south than what models are indicating. But James Vitale, you'll get your 70s in Ocean County. As long as you're away from the ocean, you're going to be fine. You're going to be 70s to near 80. 70s for sure on Friday, 70s to near 80 on Saturday before the back door comes in and sets up for what's going to be a pretty miserable Sunday, because before the rains come, we're just going to be in a lot of clouds, probably some rain or some light rain or drizzle, and then the heavier downpours come late Sunday into Sunday night. Sean K., I just ran through Europe, so on the playback, just go back about, we're at 30 minutes in here, so go back around 22, 23 minutes in, and you'll check with Europe, what I showed with Europe. It doesn't really look like anything major is going to be going on across the continent and across the British Isles. It looks just like, typical mid-April weather is setting up. Bach 505, why do they only take the last 30 years when calculating average instead from the very beginning? I think because this way, with 30 years, everybody's on the same set, and it's the same 30 years for everybody. If you use, I'll give you an example. I don't know, I haven't recalculated it lately. I'm sure it's probably edged up. But just for snowfall for New York City measured at Central Park. Now, their records go back to 1869. And I remember in the late 70s, when I started working, the average snowfall for New York City was 29.5 inches. And that was kind of a long-term average. During the 80s and 90s, when you added those numbers in, that average dropped to about 28.5. And the 30-year average, actually from in 2000, when we were looking at the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the 30-year average dropped to 20 inches, because that was the least snowiest 30-year period on New York record. Now, I'm going to tell you, when they, we know that when they recalculated in 2010, they took out that the 70s came out. 2010 was a snowy decade. Those came in, so the average jumped from 20 to 25. Now I'm gonna tell you, because I kind of ran some quick numbers on this, and when in 2020, when we take out the 80s, and we'll just have the 90s, the 1990 to 2019. So when we take out the 80s, that average is going to go above 30. It may even go up to like 31 or 2, depending on how much snow we get next winter. And we only need, Central Park only needs 6 inches more of snow. If we get as little as 6 inches of snow next winter, which would make it one of the least snowiest winters on record, we will still wind up with the snowiest decade in New York City weather history. It will take out the 1870s and the 1880s. So that's how much snow we've seen. I think the average is going to jump to about 31 or 2. My average here on Long Island is probably going to jump up to 41 or 2. Long-term average here is about 31. I'm sorry, is about 32 inches where I am in Central Long Island. Amounts vary from place to place, but you're going to see those normals go up. I don't think you're going to see too much change in the temperatures, but the snow has definitely been, we are in some really, really strong upcycle that began around the year 2000 as far as snow is concerned, certainly in my neck of the woods. Let's see. Dio Nan Kumar, don't like the this weather pattern. Too many storms and below temperatures for April. It's a fairly active pattern, and yes, that is, a lot of times in the spring, when you get the more typical springtime pattern is for frequent weather systems to come through. Maybe not all strong ones, but a bunch of weaker ones, and therefore you really only wind up with a nice day, 1 or 2 nice days at most back to back, and then you wind up with a day or 2 or 3 of rain and raw conditions. This is springtime in the coastal areas of the northern mid-Atlantic and in the Northeast. Anthony Orr, if we had more tropical cyclone formation in the month of May to make it past Statistical noise. Will NHC consider moving the season up to May 15th to join the Eastern Pacific? Well, you know what? That's a question for them. I don't know what their criteria is and how they, it's always been June 1st to November 30th, so I don't know what their criteria is. Tropical cyclones in May are unusual but not unheard of in the Atlantic, and we've seen a few of them in the last number of years. Ocean water temperatures in the Atlantic, in the Southwest Atlantic, are unusually warm. So whether that winds up being a catalyst for an early season tropical storm off the East Coast, I think we had one last year, and I think we also had one the year before. I'll have to double check. My memory's not as good with these things as it used to be, but we're going to have to ask them that question. I tend to think they probably will leave things as is, because really the bulk of the activity is from in the Atlantic is August to late July to mid-October. That really is the meat of the season, and that's where you see most of your landfalls. That's not to say you can't have systems. We certainly have had systems in the Gulf of Mexico. We've had hurricanes in June come into the Gulf Coast. But the meat of the season really is from late July to mid-October, right? That's the real critical window. And Shellyman Studios, if you can turn off this blocking pattern that looks like it wants to develop, you certainly have my permission to do so, because frankly, I really wish it would go away. And spring is usually a time for strong blocking patterns to develop in the North Atlantic. It's part of that transition that the atmosphere makes. Going from winter to summer, a lot of dying vortices or the vortex, or more than one vortex, weakening and repositioning itself and gradually disappearing as we move through the months of May and June. So this is all part of the process. The atmosphere has work to do, and unfortunately, during the springtime, we tend to get victimized by it with the long rounds of raw weather in my area, and of course severe weather, which is going into full swing now as we move through the rest of April and going into the month of May. Okay, folks, we're going to leave it there at this point. Thank you very much for being here tonight. Don't forget tonight, 9:15 p.m. on my website, on my Facebook page, meteorologist Joe Cioffi, or on Joe Rayo's Facebook page, Joe Rayo Weather. You can watch the Joe and Joe show beginning at 9:15. If you missed it, last night's is in my video library on my video channel. Take a look, because Joe brought in some very interesting books, David Ludlam's books, where he researched storms that occurred in the 1800s in the Northeast, and produced some heavy snows. Surprisingly, some of them were very deep in the month of April, and even in the month of May. So he explains all that and talks about a few of those, including one that dumped over a foot of snow in New York City late, I think it was in 1840. There were some measurements that were documented in parts of Brooklyn. T-Bear, I know, still cold in eastern PA, but at least you've got that warm weather coming, so you're going to get into the 70s Friday and Saturday in your neck of the woods. So the back door won't get to you on Saturday. Saturday night into Sunday, yes, but Saturday during the daytime, absolutely not. All right, folks, have a great evening. We will see you tomorrow. And again, Joe and Joe show tonight, 9:15 on Facebook.